Yes, in tonight's programme, Michael explores the power of ideas, specifically those of the Buddha, at 9. First on BBC Two, life begins at 40, especially in the garden.
This is the story of a nation's obsession with gardening. There are 6 gardens, 5 head gardeners, and millions of visitors every week, none of whom leaves a trace. Over the next hour, Carol, Joe, Rachel, and myself will take you on a journey of pure nostalgia.
We love Gardener's World every Friday night.
It's lovely sitting back in the settee, watching them do all the work.
Very, very happy 40th birthday. Keep digging.
I have my own sofa, I lie out on it with a cup of tea and a piece of chocolate.
A little light repast might be taken, which is usually my favourite, lettuce sandwiches and an avocado pear.
Happy 40th birthday, Gardener's World.
Big Monty hams.
Kneading that soil.
Very happy 40th birthday. And I've been watching for 40 years.
When we were filming Monica the Glen, I used to really look forward on a Friday night, after the day's filming, coming back, putting my feet up and watching Gardener's World.
My life seems completely grey, bleak and pointless.
Well, yes, sometimes that's God's way of getting you to enjoy Gardener's World.
Gardener's World is 40 years old, but its origins go back to 1956, when Percy Thrower began Gardening Club.
If you were with us a month ago, you saw us potting tomatoes into the final pots, or I said then that they could be put into orange boxes.
Of course, in those days of black and white telly, describing colour could be very difficult indeed. So, for example, this echinacea, how do you really get across the delicacy of the pink that is almost purple and these touches of orange, but then it's a sort of marmalade-y brown?
But television was about to change forever. In 1967, colour pictures came to the small screen, and Gardener's World was born.
Good evening. As you see, this week, Gardener's World comes from Shrewsbury.
It was so exciting to see these wonderful, vibrant greens, the beautiful blue sky, the colour of the flowers. And I think, you know, one would have been happy to watch Gardener's World round the clock because we weren't used to colour and it was such a luxury.
Suddenly, with the advent of colour television, I mean, it was a whole new world, and there was such excitement. He said, I no longer have to say a daffodil is yellow. You know?
A convoy of BBC outside broadcast lorries regularly squeezed their way along narrow country lanes to record Gardener's World from its new home, which was a bungalow Percy had built for his family near Shrewsbury, and it was called the Magnolias.
Good evening. September. The sun is still shining.
People don't seem to recall these days that Percy Thrower was God in the gardening world.
Percy was the first identifiable icon, and it's impossible to convey how big he was.
I remember going to a garden centre to open a new set of premises, and it stopped the traffic for 6 miles in every direction.
Dad very casually on television one day said, oh, and I've got my own garden open for charity this weekend.
9,500 people turned up. Well, 9,500 people paid admission. Yeah. The police tell me that there are almost as many people who never got there because the country lanes all round were absolutely jammed. There were 40 coaches, and the farmer allowed us the field opposite, which is a big bank, to park the cars on. Gosh, it was like looking at on a race meeting or a flower show.
Percy's training as a Royal Parks head gardener gave him great authority, but in fact the layout was very modern. Perfect lawn with island beds dedicated each to groups of plants, roses, shrubs, and of course bedding.
And for the purpose of Gardener's World, we made this into not a rock garden, but a rock bed. You put the stones in as though they'd roll down the hillside or though they're coming up through the ground like an outcrop of natural rock.
There was a very formulaic approach, and that was what you did, and if Percy did it on the telly, then everybody would follow around the country. There was only one way to do everything.
Domestic gardens of the 1950s and 60s reflected the ideas of grand parks and gardens, only on a much smaller scale. There would be a patch of green lawn with a colourful border or two, usually proudly displaying the latest hybrid tea roses.
Ina Harkness. Peace. Superstar.
I think it was colour television which had the effect. An enormous increase in the sale of roses. Something between 40 or 50 million bushes a year being sold.
Rose care became a regular feature on Gardener's World.
No doubt we shall get green fly. I expect we shall get some mildew, black spot, and in many parts of the country there may be rust. That means that we've got to spray, and spray fairly regularly. Make sure that we cover all the stem completely. This is the standard rose, and first of all we look for this, the root system. This is possibly the most important part of the plant. Now the soil goes in.
It was a magical world to a kid. There was this mystique about gardening, and none of my family were interested, so there was Percy talking to me on a Friday night.
So if you've only got room for one plum tree on a wall, my suggestion is Victoria.
As a little kid, I listened to Gardener's Question Time. As a young man, I watched Gardener's World, watched Percy Thrower. I wanted to be those people. I wanted to be as good as them.
These pansies, pulling them out before they do any more damage.
And then we talk about it too. What nerds.
It's here again. That time to start thinking about faraway places with strange-sounding names.
As foreign travel became more popular and accessible, Gardener's World viewers were exposed to a whole new range of colourful and exotic plants.
Good evening. Last week in Madeira, we were looking at the canary date palm, the avocado pear with the young fruits on.
And they looked to Percy to show them how they might grow them in their own gardens.
I have never as yet seen an avocado pear fruiting in this country, but they're grown quite a lot as an attractive leaf plant for the house. Now here I've got a lemon tree in flower. It's very exciting to be able to gather a nice ripe lemon, take it in, cut it up and put it in a gin and tonic. So I hope you're going to join us again in Gardener's World next week. Until then, good night.
Things would stop for lunch at 1 o'clock. All the crew would go off and get their sandwiches, whatever, but the producer and the director, and the other presenters, would go into the dining room at the Magnolias, and Percy and Mrs. Percy, as Connie was known, would do a roast dinner, and Percy would carve.
That's a really nice roast, Percy.
Yes.
And some vegetables too. Grown them yourself?
Oh, lunch always began with a glass of sherry.
Everything had to be on the table, piping hot.
That smells good. Clever girl.
Oh, treacle pudding, something like that.
And it was expected. You know, she just did it.
And then Percy would find the nearest armchair, slump down, nod off for a quarter of an hour.
And Mum would then go in and wake him with a cup of tea. Yes, always with a cup of tea.
Mum Percy trying to get cracking again, and up he'd get and we'd get on with the job.
And then it was tea again in the afternoon, because so she was always on the go. She could never do anything else but be there.
Oh, it's made me feel so hungry seeing all that food. Oh, she made it look so easy.
Next week we're going to Clack's Farm again, so I hope you'll join us on Friday next at 9 o'clock. You won't forget, will you?
Whilst Percy was definitely the nation's head gardener, the growing of fruit and veg was done at Clack's Farm under the guidance of Arthur Billitt.
Now, the soil has warmed up a bit, and we can now think about sowing carrots.
Arthur began his career at Gardener's World at the age of 67, and he was an expert fruit and veg grower.
They worked extremely well on screen. They were friends anyway. They'd both known each other for a long time before. But they'd have a good friendly argument, which was all to the good of the programme.
I think with gardeners there's always a little bit of rivalry. Arthur would say, have you seen the size of my onions this year, Percy? And Dad would say, oh, I think mine are every bit as big as that, you know.
I like to be able to boast about something. Last year I had an onion £4 6 ounces. I know the record is £7 6 ounces. I'm getting there stage by stage.
In those days, your skill as a vegetable grower was measured in size and shape, especially at flower shows. And it was dominated by men and seemed to be very little to do with flavour or taste. Vegetable growing was almost like a men's club.
Fred, what do you think to the vegetables we've got at Clack's farm today?
Well, Arthur, there are one or two dishes here which it's difficult to express the joy and pleasure in viewing them.
Even the greenest fingers need a little help.
You see, it's an organic-based, all-round fertiliser that releases all those essential plant foods in a way which suits vegetables.
Dad was working for ICI as a sort of consultant at the time, and ICI asked if he could do some commercials on ITV. He wrote to the BBC.
Percy?
Yeah?
Have you got a moment?
Certainly. What's the matter?
It's my lawn. Just look at it. It's a bed of weeds, isn't it?
You should do the same as I do. I give mine a dressing of ICI Lawn Plus.
I had no option but to show that letter to the controller of BBC Two at the time, who blew his top and said, no way.
Weeds? Every garden has them. That's why every gardener should have Weedol and Path Clear from ICI.
I remember the headlines now. Percy gets the welly boobs. They had a field day with it, you know.
It was, in some ways, a disappointing way to go when he'd put all those years into television.
Well, I've had no complaints from this lot so far.
Even the greenest fingers need a little help.
I think, after all those years, Percy had kind of been there, done that, coming to the end and saw this golden handshake, this golden opportunity, and thought, I know they will, they'll give me the push, but I'm going to go for it. I think he knew exactly what he was doing.
Percy was sacked from Gardener's World in 1976 at the age of 63.
Nobly Anum's conundrum. Oh, that's absolutely fun. What's so different about
Well, that it thrives on being sprayed.
Oh, you have to spray it.
Yes, but never in daylight.
Of course, never in daylight.
Happy birthday, Gardener's World. I understand you're 40, so just a little bit older than me.
In 1976, Clack's Farm became the base for Gardener's World. Arthur Billitt was joined by a young Peter Seabrook with a very unusual dress sense.
This is the one which was worn on Gardener's World and is still worn. If you start with good products, you know they last.
But what's been happening at Clack's Farm? Well, Arthur, come on. I mean, what have you got lined up for us that's new and exciting in the...
Bradford. Weaving. And there you are.
Actually, once you get started, you know, you really can't stop.
But I had it designed because I thought if people are saying, why is he wearing that stupid waistcoat, they wouldn't be looking at how nervous and foolish I was.
Actually, it's amazing the amount of growth that a plant can make in a year. You have to keep clipping.
And he always has the newest variety at his fingertips, the newest development.
Now, don't go rushing to your catalogues and asking everybody for it, because it's not even going to be available until next September.
I envy him his capacity to have his finger on the button, still at his very advanced age.
But there's lots and lots of jobs, too, that we need to do with vegetables. Come on, Arthur, get that nicely switched off.
The veg garden at Clack's Farm remained a vision of military perfection. There was no room for failure. Pristine vegetables, good enough for the show bench, stood to attention under the all-seeing eyes of Arthur and Peter.
I think you're an expert on radish. How many varieties did you grow last year, Peter?
Well, we grew about 44, in fact, but...
Not a leaf out of place. No weeds, no pests, no disease. With a regime like this, chemicals were mandatory. Chemicals were nothing new. They'd been in use since Victorian times, but it was during the war years when food was in short supply that chemical usage really took off.
You've got to be ruthless. It's you or them.
Tackle the pest. Tackle the murder.
The deadly power of DDT, the slightest contact, travels up an insect's legs, paralysing it and destroying its nervous system.
I remember the lovely old story of a guy on allotment, and he was using a puffer pack with the dust, and he was enveloped in this entire white cloud that looked like some great lump of cumulus that had come down and settled on Earth. And a friend shouted across, "Are you all right?" I said, "Yes, I'm all right, it's only DDT." Protective clothing, well, you might, if you really thought about it, wear a pair of rubber gloves. Other than that, you just got on with it, you know.
Lindane to control the sucking insects and the caterpillars, and Captan to control the pear scab.
In Arthur's book, and many others of the time, the list of chemical cures was extensive. The prevailing ethic was that every problem had its solution. Mildew on your peas? Spray with Benamil.
What's the point in growing raw carrots and throwing half of them away because they got carrot fly?
Yeah.
It's lovely.
You don't mind a little soil?
Oh, no.
Clax Farm soil's good for you.
Beautiful.
Perennial weeds in your lawn? Use Lawnox Plus.
If you're a professional gardener, you don't have many failures. You know, you're there to do the job properly. And I can't really mess with failures.
And don't forget Murphy's Morteg.
As an amateur, we don't need pristine products. We can have a little few holes, you know, and the odd caterpillar, it's good protein. You know, boiled up, you don't notice it. Eat it and just enjoy it.
I've noticed we've got a big jay who comes and collects up snails and beats them to bits on my fig trees.
I don't have to worry about eradicating them because I've got a pair of chickens. I've got more flea beetles than you can shake a stick at.
Put them in a bucket, take them back and stamp on them.
Masses of beer traps everywhere.
And they die happy.
I pick and release. Yeah, I can't squidge.
I'm a thrower over into the other field across the way.
This is no time for hesitation.
Before we move on from Clax Farm, there's one infamous 70s planting duo that had a lasting effect on gardens everywhere. Fashion came to the garden. Conifers and heathers were cutting edge. They answered the home gardener's demand for all year round colour and interest. Low maintenance gardening was born. In 1977, Gardener's World visited nurseryman Adrian Bloom, who was cornering the market in this new craze.
Now, anybody who gets fed up with grass surely should look at this.
Well, I think it's a very good alternative. In fact, you can make quite a good carpet, but why make a carpet all the same? You know, why not make it a bit different, such as, the varieties that we're showing in here? Our business grew tremendously on the back of the conifers. In fact, at one time, we had 1 million conifers on the nursery. We were certainly propagating 500,000 a year.
Suddenly, there were these evergreen conifer gardens appearing in front of a red brick council house, and it was a terrible clash aesthetically.
Like roses, everybody wanted them, everybody was growing them, everybody was producing new varieties, but when you actually sat back and looked at them, well, how does that differ from this one? I've talked enough times about both plants, but there are only so many things you can say about heathers.
Christopher Lloyd always used to say very firmly, there's one place for heather and that's on the hillside. So...
And not forgetting that other plant of the 70s, the pampas grass. Rumour has it that if you owned one, you were a bit of a swinger.
Well, you know what they say about the 70s, if you were there, you don't remember any of it. I probably was a swinger by anyone's definition, but I didn't have pampas grass.
Many happy returns for the 40th birthday of Gardener's World.
Happy 40th birthday, Gardener's World.
In 1979, Peter Seabrook left Gardener's World.
And then there was a whole series of presenters, you know, they went through them almost like putting hedge trimmings through a shredder.
That's one of the qualities.
Arthur was coming close to retirement, and so the search for the next head gardener began. The BBC trialled 3 varieties: Clay Jones.
Next May, Miracles. Wonderful display of colour.
Geoffrey Smith.
I'm really taken with those. They are spanking plants.
And a young Jeff Hamilton joined the team from his home, the first Barnesdale.
Now, I wanted for these stepping stones to use natural Yorkstone. Then I looked at the price, and quite frankly, it's astronomical.
By 1982, Gardener's World was in need of a new garden and a new full-time head gardener. It was now time for Jeff Hamilton to take centre stage. He mortgaged himself to the hilt, bought 7 acres of muddy fields, and this became the home of Gardener's World for the next 14 years.
Welcome to a new series of Gardener's World, and welcome particularly to Barnesdale. I'm Jeff Hamilton, and this is my garden where we'll be coming back every 2 or 3 weeks during the season for some real down-to-earth, dirt under the fingernails gardening.
Jeff took over the second Barnesdale. It was literally an empty field, so you could carve off a lump to do whatever you liked.
In between filming schedules, Jeff set about cultivating more of the fields, so there was something different to show the viewer each week. And without much of a master plan, a series of themed gardens began to evolve.
There were so many bits of Barnesdale. I mean, it was like a patchwork, really, of different individual gardens, and then there was an element of things constantly changing as well. I loved the woodland bit with a little hide in it to watch your birds from. I thought that was fantastic.
I saw him do his artisan's garden. I heard him talking about how being surrounded by these plants was lifting his spirits. He had me hooked, and I thought, I won't rest until I have a garden that I can sit in that is as lovely as that. Of course, I'm still trying.
And every time he did a new small garden, he would get loads of letters saying, this garden's not small, you should see my garden. And they got smaller and smaller and smaller. The cameras used to make them look massive. And whenever any visitors came, they said, oh, they really are small, aren't they?
If you look at a plan of Barnesdale, it looks all wrong. No garden designer would ever have designed that. But when you go there, it feels all right. And I think that's because it's all about Jeff Hamilton. The man absolutely infuses the place. And actually, all great gardens, all good gardens, come down to individuals.
Next week, we start building. And throughout the series, we're going to show you how to turn this into this.
There was something about the way that Jeff picked up a spade that made you feel that man really knows how to use that.
Oh, it's fine.
Somehow he managed to appeal to the guys in their string vests who do the dahlias, and then the people who've got grand gardens as well.
Jeff was like the bloke next door. Jeff would actually... You could imagine yourself having a pint with Jeff if you were a bloke, or even if you were a woman.
As viewers, we went on many inspirational journeys with Jeff as he created more and more gardens, 17 in total. He had a huge influence on a generation of amateur gardeners, and unlike his predecessors, he showed his failures, which was something that we could all learn from.
If you think that we so-called experts always get it right, you're going to love this. But down here, it's a disaster.
Jeff shared mistakes with the viewers. He was a bit reluctant at first, but he did realise very quickly that for actually Jeff to say, well, I did this, and look, you know, what a mess, what a disaster, was hugely encouraging.
Showing his mistakes made him far more popular than, you know, showing you what the right thing to do was.
The leaf curl doesn't seem to have affected the crop at all, but as soon as I got over that problem, I was struck down with another one that I haven't come across before. I'm replacing another disastrous rose down here, and I've already dug the hole, which should be 2 foot square by at least a foot deep.
I think the thing about Jeff Hamilton was that, you know, he made everybody feel that everything was possible. You watched him and you didn't think, oh, here's an expert, you know, I wish I could do that. You just thought, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to do it.
Now, you wouldn't normally need to do your double digging with a crowbar, but underneath my clay, I've got a solid layer of ironstone.
I'd even come in from the garden to watch him because, you know, that's how good he was.
Showing his failures was only the start of many changes that Jeff would bring to the programme. The most significant, and one that would affect the future of Gardener's World, was his conversion to organic gardening.
I think perhaps Jeff went through that crisis of conscience that all gardeners of our relative age went through, who were brought up on chemicals and control-freakish gardening, if you like. When anything appeared that was untoward, you wiped it out.
I think he saw organics as a personal journey. And he wasn't evangelical about it, And for quite a long time, he'll give you both options. If you're organic, you do this. If you're not organic, you use that chemical. But it was something that evolved.
I think that the control plot, first of all, whether you feed organically or chemically, you really have got to give your plants something. Those really are pathetic. I've been having the odd spot of trouble with my melons. I'm trying out a new organic growing bag and comparing it with an inorganic one that I've used successfully for many years now. We can't use slug pellets because it's an organic plot, so I'm going to try a new method. This is very coarse bark. This is the organic herbicide, the good old hoe. And the organic plot, well, it speaks for itself. It certainly is a viable alternative.
I actually, personally, discouraged Jeff being too organic. But in most cases, the presenter's views were what you got.
So all in all, I'm convinced that organic gardening is a viable alternative.
I think that he realised that he needed to change. And he took you with him as the viewer, and that was very powerful because you trusted him. You didn't quite know where you were going, but you were quite happy for him to take you there.
It took 5 years of trials, all shared with Gardeners World viewers, before Jeff stopped using chemicals altogether at Barnesdale, convinced that organic gardening was the way forward.
And when I've said stop spraying, nobody's believed me. Well, here's the proof of the pudding. This is my honeysuckle, and it's thriving without a sign of greenfly or blackfly, and it has never been sprayed with anything at all. My theory is that if you spray indiscriminately, then you kill the things that eat the greenfly and the blackfly too, and just build up troubles for yourself.
There was a huge backlash from the chemical companies who felt that they were no longer being adequately represented on a Friday night on the flagship gardening programme. They were, and still are, an enormous section of the commercial horticultural industry, and they felt that they'd... Not only had they lost a voice on a Friday night, but quite the reverse, they were actually now being criticised.
So what? You know, he had much higher aims, much higher views, and you know, I mean, he cared more about the planet and the plants and your garden.
And he did have a lot of hostility at the beginning. I can remember going to press conferences where people got up and actually attacked Jeff, you know, for taking this view. It was extraordinary, but he stuck to his guns and he proved that it worked.
Jeff certainly had his own way of doing things, but like every good head gardener, he had a great team of experts behind him.
And this is the kind of place they love to hide, underneath stones.
In the early days, Pippa Greenwood offered the chemical cure to Jeff's organic alternative.
What you really need to do is to combine it with regular use of a weed killer.
Isn't this superb? The regal lily.
Plantsman Roy Lancaster became a regular contributor.
Now, Roy Lancaster's my favourite, and I think it's time you brought him back.
When it comes to mass summer colour effects, you can't beat perennials. And perennials like this great forest of Achillea gold plate.
Roy Lancaster he's an iconic figure. You know, he's travelled all over the world, he's seen the plants in the wild, which is absolutely essential if you need to understand how a plant grows. And he makes it real because he's had that experience, and his enthusiasm is totally infectious. It comes straight through the screen.
Can you imagine anything more exotic than this? It's one of the many reasons why people come to Trengwainton from far and wide, even on days like this with the rain pouring down. Through those 8 years, had some tremendous experiences and a lot of fun with plants.
Nothing in this garden is ever wasted.
Jeff was always knocking things up for a couple of bob. I mean, it was almost his mantra.
And it's finished off with a little orb on the top, and that is the plastic ball from a lavatory cistern.
And sometimes the results were great, and sometimes you think, yes, possibly, but not in my garden, thank you very much.
Now, I saw one of these in an upmarket garden centre and just copied it. And I made it for about a tenth of their price. So what I've got is this bottle. It's a plastic vegetable oil bottle, and I've just pierced some holes in the top with a needle, and then fill it with water, turn it upside down and squeeze. And there we are. That's a perfect watering can.
All this business about making a cold frame out of 3 coat hangers and some dry cleaning plastic. I mean, come on. Nobody in Britain was that poor then.
The only trouble with using these containers from the Chinese takeaway is that half an hour after you've pricked out one box, you feel you want to do another one. Sorry, that's a Chinese takeaway joke.
I never told him that John and I, that's my husband and I, used to call him Tin Pot Hamilton. And that was because of all his yoghurt pots and pieces of, you know, fencing flooring that he would make into things, and his bits of tinfoil on the windowsill, so his Tin Pot Hamilton.
I've just bought this bunch of carnations for my wife for purely romantic reasons. Well, I got them wholesale, and I also noticed that there are 1 or 2 good side shoots on them. And, of course, these will make very good new plants.
But what started out as money-saving tips took on more significance as Jeff started to increasingly understand the impact gardening had on the environment.
This is what it looks like once the stone strippers have been in. The lovely limestone pavements have gone, the soil between the rocks has gone, so, of course, the plants have gone too. It's a scene of utter devastation. For the past few months, I've been experimenting with artificial rock.
He started moulding his own rocks because he was very, very concerned, quite rightly, about how natural stone was being taken from its natural environment.
If you just stick this concrete into the hole, when you dig it out, it'll look like a bit of concrete you've dug out of the ground, and of course that's the last thing you want. So the first job is to line the hole with a bit of strong polythene.
I do remember the first time I saw them because they were brand new, they were spankingly concretey looking, and absolutely awful. But he was right, funnily enough, as he always was in the end. Very, very quickly, they look fine, and they do look wonderfully like real bits of rock, but when he did it the first time, I really thought he'd lost it, I have to admit.
He showed us that gardening was related to the wider environment. So what you grew in your window box, or rather how you grew it, was affecting a peat bog miles away, or your little rockery was going to directly connect to those lovely limestone pavements, which could be 400 or 500 miles away. So it was all part of a bigger issue. Now, this was really special. Now, this was taking on the establishment. And I know for a fact that he was regarded by many in the establishment as a member of the awkward squad.
Because of my concern for peat, I've been trialling these new coconut fibre or coir composts over the past couple of years, and I've found that provided you use them properly, they give excellent results. And this is the new product, which is a coconut fibre compost, and looks very promising indeed.
Jeff was so pro the use of coir on Gardener's World, he caused outrage with the Peat Association and had to prove to the BBC that he wasn't benefiting from it personally.
I don't think that gardeners will want to be associated with the destruction of wildlife sites. There are plenty of alternatives. I think we should use them.
I don't think we would be in the situation now with multi-purpose peat-free composts unless Jeff had championed them in the way that he did.
Jeff's gardening ethos wasn't the only way he shook up the establishment. In those days, it was a bit of an old boys' club, but over half of all amateur gardeners were women, so it was time for them to take up the trowel.
This is a story about sex.
You didn't even see a main presenter who was female until the early 80s, you know, when Mary Spiller came along.
The best thing to do is to take a few pots and fill them with compost.
I didn't really realise at the time that I was the first female presenter. I didn't think about whether we were male or female. You know, it was just the fun of presenting.
I'm sure you'll all recognise the mother-in-law's tongue, which is producing a little baby at the side.
Anne Swithinbank was really what we were looking for, and she was a lovely lass, and we were all in love with her.
If they're quite happy and they're flowering well, leave them be. But something like this needs to be taken out of its pot and sorted out.
And they used to call me the milkmaid, and I think it was because I was very green behind the ears and sort of naive and wholesome. It's ghastly, isn't it? I'd like to think I've changed.
I think Rachel at the time is absolutely gorgeous, and as for female presenters on Gardener's World, she's certainly my favourite.
And you need to have a male nearby to pollinate it.
She's the first lady I saw on TV who had the ability to outshine the plant she was talking about.
Female in first. This one is Skimmia japonica vetchii.
Remember Victoria Corran writing a piece saying, you know, the last thing we need is another ex-model turned presenter. That required a little bit of battling against at the beginning.
I turned up in a pair of jeans and a T-shirt in exactly the same way that I do most places, and there was this image consultant waiting for me.
A gardener's natural inclination, if you've worked in gardening, is to wear grubby clothes because the dirt doesn't show. You shove your hair any old how, it's usually raining. I've got 3 layers of thermal underwear and a hideous big jacket. And if that's glamour, great.
We had this chat that went something like, well, you'd need your hair doing, and we need to talk about makeup and your clothes. And then we had to go and get some new glasses because I didn't like the glasses. And I came out looking like Marjorie Proops. It was ridiculous. Often we don't quite know what to do with it. Cleaning them up can make them look really like jewels. And there I was on Gardener's World, mucking about with compost and primulas and pots in a cream jumper. Grit is expensive, I know, but use it because it will shift that water, it will help the roots to grow and become a real treasure. So duffed up by the BBC image consultant.
Happy 40th birthday to Gardener's World, and you're looking very good on it.
A while ago, a farmer accidentally dropped some bales of barley straw into a very green pond, and in a very short time, it cleared. So you townies will have to go to the country for some barley straw, but if you can find it, stuff it into a pair of old tights. You want a good wadge, so the bigger the better. And then
Jeff continued to inspire the nation's gardeners with his unique approach.
Now, some of these rocks are pretty heavy.
But in 1995, he suffered his first heart attack. This prompted his decision to retire.
And it was at Gardener's World Live in the June before he died that he said, when do you want to take over then? So I said, when do you want to stop? And he said, well, I thought I'd give up next Easter. So I said, fine, OK, we'll take it up then, you know. So I'll start the season off, and then in Easter, you know, you can do it.
But just 2 months later, in August 1996, whilst out on a charity cycle ride, Jeff suffered a fatal heart attack at the age of just 59.
That was terrible. So to go in there and take over from, we always used to call him Saint Jeff at home, slightly sarcastically, because he was a mage, you know, because he was so revered. And it was fiendishly difficult. Just when you thought the winter would never end, out come the snowdrops to cheer you up. A new spring, a new beginning, a new gardener and a new garden. This is Barleywood in Hampshire.
Alan's arrival was 7 months premature, and Jeff was always going to be a very hard act to follow.
Alan was suffering from all that flack about, you know, he's not Jeff Hamilton. He was never Jeff Hamilton, and any presenter that follows the previous presenter has their own style.
And he was so different that, you know, it wasn't as if somebody had taken over and was trying to be like another Jeff, which would have been awful.
I remember the letters that came in. One vividly, because it began, Dear Mr. Titchmarsh, when you took over from Jeff Hamilton, my heart sank. I've been watching you these past few months. ... You'll do. Nicest thing anybody's ever written to me. The house sits at the bottom of a hill. There's a terrace with a bubble fountain, homemade topiary peacocks, a gravel garden and the tea house. And then there are zigzag paths climbing up this hill, which, at its steepest, is about 1 in 4. I didn't want to do what Jeff had done, which is make all those little stage sets, because my garden had existed before I started Gardener's World, and I was anxious to try and keep it working as my garden, with all the things in it you would need for Gardener's World. The kitchen garden is pretty near the top of the slope. It's a formal garden surrounded by clipped yew hedges with dwarf box hedges inside and simply stuffed to the gunnels with vegetables and step-over fruit trees. And
Barleywood was Alan's home and very much his personal garden filled with his ideas and thoughts about gardening. And for us viewers, it was a fascinating glimpse into his real garden. Because let's face it, we all love to be a bit nosy.
And the formal pattern of beds is surrounded by gravel paths, has a fountain in the centre and a statue, and all the beds are stuffed with hardy annuals, half-hardy annuals.
Alan had a really keen sense of the aesthetic, which drove his vision for gardening.
Alan started talking a bit more about design in the garden and helped you visualise your own plot and how you could change that.
It mattered to Alan that the colours went and how it all looked and, you know, all that kind of thing. And, you know, making things, nice decking and good quality stuff.
I wanted to get out of this herbaceous border, drift of this, drift of that, drift at the other. I was very anxious to try and create little atmospheres. I love moods in a garden. I can well believe when I look at these that once upon a time dinosaurs crept around beneath them. They do have that primitive feel.
He would really tune in to what was ever going on at the time.
When the late, great garden designer Christopher Lloyd ripped out his rose borders at Great Dixter, it made gardening headlines.
He replaced all those tired old hybrid teas with, you know, all these vibrant plants, huge cannas and marvellous arundo, you know, that great big Mediterranean grass, and all these wonderful dahlias, you know, these beautiful, beautiful colours.
Bananas underplanted with scarlet busy lizzies.
He saw Christopher Lloyd doing it on a sort of grandish scale, and he thought, well, I can do this on a small scale that works for the TV, but people can pick up on, and he was brilliant at that.
I feel like David Attenborough here in the jungle. I think the area that will forever be associated with me at Barleywood, and it's the one I do feel the greatest affinity to, because it was new at the time, was the little pale blue pavilion at the top, coloured paint in a garden. Oh, goodness me. It used to be black. Now it's forget-me-not blue. That's because I think it fits rather better with the seaside garden behind it, and this is where I sneak away to when nobody's looking. Sit in my deck chair and enjoy a spot of sunshine. It was terribly avant-garde, that, you know, when I did it. I probably pinched it from somewhere, because, you know, I can't claim to have entirely original.
Derek Jarman definitely started it in his garden in Dungeness. But again, Alan picked up on it and he adapted it and make it work in his own garden.
This fresh approach to garden design, which Alan brought to Gardener's World, soon found a whole new audience. And through ground force, he reached a new generation of gardeners.
We're going jungly and plantation house, guys. So what it is a classic example of where decking really comes into its own. So leaving your bit of terrace up here, what I'm hoping to do is to have decks shooting out over this area at different levels. Hello, Ian. How nice to see you.
And you.
This is the latest reveal 7 we've ever had in our lives. Shock horror, instant gardens, no such thing. Oh, get away. But it was fun, and we achieved, I hope, a bit of movement in gardening, a bit of excitement. Nice Hellebore ceilings, Mr. Swift.
Yeah, they're lovely, aren't they?
Well grown, you see.
I like the way that he sort of played the head gardener role, and we were working underneath him, and that seemed perfectly fair.
It's a very strange atmosphere working in somebody else's garden, and I think more strange for the person that owns the garden than it is for somebody like me who was just working there. We did tend to ask permission if we could do things, and so we always just said, look, I'm going to put this in there. Is that all right? He always said, yeah, of course, that's fine. And you knew whether he really meant it, because if you went back 10 minutes later, if it was still there, he wanted it. If it had been hoiked out and put back in the pot and the border fluffed over, didn't want it there at all.
I'm going to half cover one of your ponds.
Yeah, no. Well, you're going to cover it all before you go, though, aren't you?
Oh, you know me, Alan. I'll never leave a job undone.
There are some fantastic plants in this tropical area of the garden, and this is one I wanted to draw your attention to.
I always used to feel that Chris was a kind of heartthrob. I never told him. I used to think he was the kind of beefcake gardener there. He was there to keep the women happy, and Rachel was there for the chaps, and I just bumbled on in between and did the links, you know.
I always turned up late. Rachel always turned up looking glamorous. Joe always turned up with a hangover. And Alan kind of breezed in and out and kept us all under control. It was like working in the family garden, really.
Chris who?
Away from Barleywood, we experts went out and about, visiting gardens across the length and breadth of Britain.
I did lots of simple project-y type things. So it was about making over very small spaces, but in a properly founded horticultural way. Well, without spending a great deal of time or money, you could look at something like this.
Well, when we were filming in a garden in Northamptonshire once, I overheard a woman talking to her daughter, and she was pointing to me and says, "Oh, look, you see that chap over there? He's one of the presenters on Gardener's World. You know, the one that never gets his hands dirty."
In fact, I remember when I did the Organic Kitchen Garden series from my own garden at home, and we actually constructed the garden true to time on camera. So you saw the grassy field, and then at the end you saw all the crops coming from it.
You may also have seen me making this tire wall for strawberries last year, and I claim that they would throw up so much heat I'd get an earlier crop. Well, we're filming this the middle of April. I've already got flowers on them. I just carried on putting in items that I wanted to do and I thought were quite good. But obviously I wasn't kept on, so nobody else thought my ideas were good enough. I've still got plenty.
I suppose the Pollards are about as eccentric as you come. As I say, lovely people. I think it is important to go out there and not keep the programme confined to barracks, but to show the wealth and breadth of gardening, particularly throughout this country.
Happy 40 years of naked gardening, Gardener's World.
Well, that's it from me. It's been lovely having you in my garden, almost every week for 7 years, and I hope you've enjoyed watching it grow. What do I say, except whatever the weather, you know the rest. Ta-da. When I'd said I was going to pack up Gardener's World, I was hauled in to the powers that be and asked why I was doing it. And was I sure I didn't want to stay? Couldn't I just do another year or two? And I said, no, I really feel it was time to go. And they said, well, we've got to find somebody to take over from you. And I suggested Monty Don. He doesn't know, but there we are.
Hello and welcome to a new series of Gardener's World. I'm very proud to be leading gardening's longest running series. Do you know it's now in its 36th year? I'm going to be joined every week by Rachel de Tame and Chris Birdshaw, who of course are old hands. But it's a fresh start for all of us, not least because we've got a new garden. And this is where we're going to be, every week, getting stuck into the nitty-gritty of real gardening.
In early January 2003, 3 months before we went on air, Rachel, Chris and I visited Berryfields together for the first time.
If we can identify what we've got.
I just want to know where the garden is, actually. That's what I'm looking for.
I think you're in it.
Am I?
Well, this area's got lots of potential, hasn't it?
It's the estate agent coming in.
No, there is. Oh, this is pretty, isn't this nice?
All these different walls and surfaces.
I like this, yes. Fantastic.
This is actually the first piece of the garden that feels like a domestic garden. I think this is
Of course, being offered the top job at Gardener's World is a pinnacle, and it's very exciting. But I've never considered myself the nation's head gardener because I'm an amateur, I'm self-taught. And really, I'm just one of you, one of the people that watches the programme that got lucky. And I love the opportunity of sharing my enthusiasm, which is passionate, about gardening. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I'm just ravished by the meadow. Start off with the vegetable garden. We've tidied it up and things are growing well, but over the winter, the pigeons have got my cabbages again. We had this marvellous potato hawk. That disappeared, pigeons flocked in, and they've stripped it. The thing I love most is the everyday stuff. It's the planting and the weeding and the mowing of lawns, the digging. And I think, for me, that is the core of Gardener's World. Now, this great crater might seem a little excessive for a plant which, at the moment, is just that big. But don't be fooled. It has aspirations to grandeur. It wants to cover the whole of this area.
Oh, I love Monty Don. I think he's just got a tremendous style. He's so good at expressing himself. But for me, and I hope you won't mind me saying this, he's like the gangster rapper of gardening. He sort of talks with these big movements, like Puff Daddy.
I think we need more purples and blues and height coming there. I want yews in there, maybe some wigwams.
And the way he stands, no one stands like Monty.
Keep it in soil that you've grown it in the border, or very damp potting compost.
He grabs a piece of hazel and he's leaning on it like Mick Jagger's microphone.
I'd like to make a point before I go any further, if I can extricate my foot.
He's a marvel. He's a marvel.
I've loved watching Monty, and I love his passion for what he's doing. And there's something of the artist about Monty, which I find very attractive.
Look at the way that the light is dancing through the Stipa gigantea onto the echinacea, this is white lustre, picking up the bright yellow of the Rudbeckia fulgida, and finally reaching this other Stipa, Stipa tenuissima, with this extraordinary fronds, just like the softest, silkiest hair.
The great thing about Monty is that he actually shows where his heart lies, and I think that's rather necessary for you to have trust. You want to know what their own stance is.
Our self-imposed hosepipe ban here at Berryfields means that we've got to recycle whatever water we can get. And here in the Long Borders, we're doing an experiment. We're using just rainwater on this side and just grey water on that side, and we want to compare the effect on pretty much the same plants. When I came to Gardener's World, there was also one other really big change. And it was decided that the garden would belong to the programme. Now, there are huge advantages in this for me, because not only do I get my garden at home, but also another second garden that I can do whatever I like in, and I get the input of other very, very good gardeners.
I think the fact that Berryfield doesn't actually belong to any of the presenters has some very good points, because you can be really objective about whichever part of it you're dealing with.
We're going to make a shrubbery for the 21st century.
The shrubbery, you see, that was my first job ever. I was a bit nervous. I'd never met Monty before.
I don't know how much that viburnum cost when it went in, Joe, but it's certainly most of it is on the ground.
It is, but it looks better, doesn't it? It's much more graceful.
There's graceful and there's lollipop-ish.
It's not a lollipop effect. This is not a lollipop.
The clematis won't mind being shaded a bit, I don't think.
OK, we'll do that.
There are some good self-sown annuals in here. There's some Atriplex that I've just spotted.
The Atriplex I secretly put in.
Oh, did you?
I did. I scattered those, I have to admit. That pink dahlia you put in.
Hang on.
It can't be allowed to stay there.
I'm not taking the blame for the pink dahlia. Actually, I think it looks quite good. Green, yellow, bit of pink. Perfect.
Pink? Pink?
I mean, you do get this sort of sense of ownership of, certain parts. I mean, my garden from cuttings, division and seeds, I really do feel like that's my garden. Look at this red auroch. It's superb. It's just wonderful. And everything here in my garden has just grown magnificently. I'm so thrilled to bits. I'm chuffed. I'm tickled pink.
The area that we made that was Rachel's garden was very personal in the sense that, they were the plants I wanted to work with and the colours I wanted to work with.
I'm restricting my colour palette quite rigidly and sticking to pinks.
You do give of yourself very much. You can't help it, because even if you know it's not really yours and it's not possibly for the long term, you still can't help yourself doing the best you can and making it a beautiful place to be for that time.
It gets fairly tall.
Now, this part of Berryfields was planted up by Rachel in the summer of 2003. And the colour scheme that she used was based on burgundies and pinks and all the colours in between. And it has looked lovely. But nearly 4 years later, it's time for a change.
Yes, Monty actually, he said, he did apologise, said, I'm terribly sorry, we had to move on and dig it up. And I said, no, I knew that's how it would be.
I've been an organic gardener for the last 20 years or so, and when I started the job, I knew that I had to garden organically here at Berryfields to give it the integrity. If you want to garden well, you've got to garden from the heart. Now, if you're a chemical gardener, you can paint the leaves with a glyphosate, but I'm an organic gardener and I wouldn't dream of doing that. I'm going to dig them out. I felt that this was a tradition that Jeff Hamilton started. He influenced me hugely, particularly with organic growing. And I like to think that here at Berryfields, we're carrying on the work that he began.
And I think that reflects what's going on in the wider world. You know, we are all trying, we're all making an effort. And even people who used to just spray without thinking are now, if they're doing it at all, they're doing so with restraint.
Now, let's go to the compost heap.
Compost is a huge thing at Berryfields. Compost is probably the biggest thing at Berryfields. Yeah, we've got lots of compost at Berryfields. Nothing leaves that site. Not a leaf gets away. Everything gets reused in there, and quite right too.
So when you get some grass cuttings, put it on.
I just love compost.
And then as you go along, don't put it in layers, but mix it up.
You get this absolutely beautiful, it's like nectar, this earth, and you feed the plants.
And if you can't get straw, if you've got a pet, a rabbit or a hamster, or chickens even, sawdust is great.
This just feeds the things in such a gentle way, like a mother would feed their child. I love compost.
And this is the big secret. Cardboard and newspaper.
And I really love those sequences on the programme where they go back to the compost heap, and I don't think you can repeat them too many times, to be honest. It's always going to be interesting.
If you recycle your cardboard in the compost heap, not only are you making more material, but you're also cutting down on landfill, which is a real problem.
Compost is the essence of gardening, and every time I see compost on the telly, I think, go on, tell them, let rip, you tell them about it.
I'm very proud of our compost, because I know that the better the quality of the compost that you make, the better the quality of the garden that you grow. And then, of course, there's the story of the pond. Now, this has been through all sorts of changes and trials and tribulations, but now it's looking pretty good. But so far, only one person has actually fallen into the pond.
That was going to happen, wasn't it?
It's nice and warm.
Yeah, I know after Monty fell in it, I've heard he, doesn't like to put the waders on too often.
Join me.
I think the waders are too big for Carol, and they're a little bit too small for Monty, but they fit me just right.
Throughout all those years, they've had this thread of passion. I'm always using the word passion, but passion is a very important word in gardening, and especially if you're hoping to teach people to do it.
Gardener's World has lasted so long, and I hope it continues to last, because it fulfills a need. However long you've been gardening, when the weekend approaches and you've only got a bit of time to go out there, you just need that nudge, that reminder that, oh yes, I ought to be doing that. So it's the calendar aspect.
And every single year, Gardener's World has reminded us how to look after our lawns.
Spiking all over with a fork.
But then use something to make some holes in the lawn. Push it in for about 4 inches and wiggle it about.
Press down on it. You've got these hollow tines, and the soil is pushed out.
Now, isn't this the greenest lawn you've ever seen?
My husband went through a lawn phase. He wanted a perfect lawn, and he became obsessed with his lawn. You know, people would come to see us, and he wouldn't come to greet them. He'd be out there looking at the lawn.
I think there's nothing like walking around a lawn on a summer's morning when it's dusted with dew.
I hate them. I think that it's the most tedious occupation in the world, is to go out there on a sunny Saturday and spend your whole time walking up and down, pushing this thing that smells of petrol and dog's mess.
We can grow the best lawns in the world in these islands. They set off everything. They're a nice rug for the garden.
Love them. Oh, love them to bits, yes. We wouldn't be able to keep the tortoise going if we didn't have the grass for them to eat, so.
We've already had fun playing with the radio-controlled lawnmower. If the day comes when we can let the machine guide itself all round the lawn, then cutting the grass will really be a pleasure. The high spot in the garden of tomorrow.
You know, in gardening, nothing ever stays still. And it seems to me that the great strength of Gardener's World over the last 40 years has been that it has changed constantly and evolved with the times. And we shall continue to do so. And we'll start next week at the same time here at Berryfields. See you then. Bye-bye.